Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we are going to bring a revival to the city.
Meet Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, the latest candidate to enter Chicago's crowded mayoral race.
A Chicago police officer with ties to the Proud Boys is allowed to stay on the force. A look at the far-right group's connection with law enforcement members.
New Twitter owner Elon Musk sparks controversy by sharing a conspiracy theory about the attack on Paul Pelosi.
With Election Day just a week away, we discuss misinformation and its effects on election judges and poll worker recruitment.
Most good election reform is guaranteed to increase voter participation.
A Chicago suburb could be the first to implement ranked choice voting.
Our early life in Chicago, though brief, has always been precious to me.
The legendary Patti Smith on poetry, performance, and her early life in Chicago.
For me to bring this to the community, it makes my day.
And how one local resident is celebrating El Dia de los Muertos.
But first, some of today's top stories. Police are searching for two gunmen who shot 14 people at a vigil in East Garfield Park last night.
Just a shame that we cannot gather outside in our own community to celebrate life and celebrate holidays without being targeted or untargeted by gun shooters for no apparent reason.
Police say the two suspects shot out of a dark SUV for only 3 seconds. Out of the 14 people hurt, 3 kids and 4 adults are listed in serious to critical condition. A 15th person was struck by a car while running from the gunfire.
Members of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's police detail engage in an early morning shootout. It happened in the 1800 block of North Monticello in Logan Square. Several officers reportedly exchanged gunfire with 3 armed assailants who attacked and robbed a 77-year-old man at gunpoint. The man was in his car waiting to take his 7-year-old grandson to school. The suspects fled the scene and police are investigating.
The man accused of killing 7 people and wounding dozens more at the Highland Park 4th of July parade is back in court. This was Robert Cremo III's first court appearance since he was indicted on 117 felony counts. Lake County prosecutors gave defense attorneys 2,500 pages of evidence against the alleged gunman. Cremo entered a not guilty plea in August. He's being held in the Lake County jail in lieu of bond.
And coming up in the program, ranked choice voting, how it works and why some want it in their communities.
But first, one-on-one with the latest candidate to enter the race for Chicago mayor. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Our minds might be on the next week's midterms, but February's mayoral election is just around the corner. A crowded field is shaping up with 13 declared candidates so far, the latest being Brandon Johnson. He's a Cook County commissioner and former public school teacher who's already received significant financial backing from local and national teachers unions. And here to tell us more about himself and his priorities as a candidate is Brandon Johnson. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, before we get into your biography, I have to get your reaction to the shooting in East Garfield Park last night that has left a reported 15 wounded.
Yeah, this is a terrible tragedy. You know, my wife and I, we're raising our 3 children on the west side of Chicago in Austin, and we think about this and we deal with this every single day. This is yet another example of what disinvestment looks like. This is another example of the failures of this particular administration that has not provided the type of vision to bring the type of hope and support that communities like the west side, the south side of Chicago needs. So our thoughts and prayers, of course, are not just with the families, but we as elected officials and community has to come together to figure out how we actually invest in communities to put an end to these senseless shootings.
And then the mayor has made things like Invest Southwest a major pillar of her agenda, investing in places like Auburn, Gresham, Austin. Are you saying that's not enough?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that it's too slow and it's too short, right? And so the type of disinvestment that we've experienced in the city of Chicago over decades now, really required something substantial and bold, and it actually has to actually close, right? We have seen, unfortunately, this administration's inability to actually close on deals that she has promised to render. And that's unfortunate because the people who are losing are ultimately the folks who continue to lose.
And you recently mentioned at a campaign kickoff you had to replace a window in your home struck by a bullet in one of your kids' bedrooms. Do you feel safe raising your kids in Austin right now?
Well, look, this is the issue, Paris, that families across the city of Chicago are confronted with on an everyday basis. And absolutely, the challenge that we have in this moment, that families have, is the fact that we're constantly negotiating our survival. And we shouldn't have to do that. We have to have guarantees. And I have 3 children, 8, 10, and 14. One of the bullets that have come through our homes has been, it's been hard. My son is a student at Kenwood High School, where one of his classmates out to lunch was gunned down and murdered. I mean, these are things that happen too often, and I don't believe that there's anyone else in this race that thinks about public safety as much as I do. And again, Austin is a dynamic community. It's the best place to live, and it is one of the more violent communities, but it's also one of the more the communities that have been disinvested in for decades, and that's the type of leadership that the city of Chicago deserves and needs in this moment.
And you've been in leadership at the Chicago Teachers Union as an organizer. You were a former teacher. You were serving your first term as the elected commissioner in the Cook County Board. Why are you the right person at this time for that job?
Well, look, the best job that I've ever had is that of a public school teacher. I taught middle school in Cabrini Green, USA, 7th and 8th graders, and that was a position that really transformed and changed my life. The challenge, though, of teaching in Chicago was, and particularly in Cabrini Green, my students will wake up every single day, and they will look out their back windows, and they would see the largesse of this economy. And they're chasing and running down an economy that's behind them, while everything in front of them, when they would wake up in the morning, were bulldozers preparing to destroy and dismantle their public housing. That tale of 2 cities, the divided city that we've lived in for too long in this city, that's why I'm running, is to bring this city together, to unite our city around a set of values that speak to equity and justice, that speaks to the needs that working families have in this moment. And it's a shame, quite frankly, that this mayor has broken multiple promises that she rendered when she was elected 4 years ago, and those broken promises have left many of our people
Which promises,
broken.
and how would you keep them? How can you? You've got a budget, you've got limited resources. How do you keep those promises?
Well, look, she said she was going to reopen our mental health clinics. She failed to do that. When you think about the despair that families are experiencing in the city of Chicago right now, the overwhelming isolation that families are experiencing, the type of depression that families are experiencing in this city, workers, families, we need to have a very robust operation that treats the conditions in which many families are enduring every single day. That promise is a failure. She also broke a promise when she said she was going to bring environmental justice to this city. Little Village didn't experience environmental justice when her administration warned her multiple times with what Hilco was doing. And somehow that failure led to an explosion in the midst of a pandemic. She also was okay with a toxic waste dump being moved into black and brown communities on the southeast side of Chicago.
Are you
Those
talking
are
about the former General Iron movement? And
yeah.
the city did eventually nix that deal.
Well, she was pushed and forced to do it. The difference between me and this administration is that you don't have to force me to stand up and fight for working people. You won't have to do that, because working people are a reflection of what my wife and I endure and experience every single day.
I want to ask you about public safety again. You've said that you want to freeze the CPD budget and invest in data-proven crime reduction strategies. What are those strategies?
Yeah, violence prevention is really the theme of this battle here that we have in the city of Chicago. And the safest cities in America are cities that have good schools, libraries, parks, transportation, jobs. If we're not investing in those critical needs, then we're not having a real conversation about what it means to have a safe community. The best thing that my father has ever done for me and my 9 brothers and sisters, he was a pastor, is that he got up and went to work every single day. The W-2, in fact, the 2 W-2s that my father had, provided security and safety for my family. Those are the type of investments that provide not only opportunity, but it provides the necessary security that families deserve. Without a real commitment to economic justice across this city, we're going to continue to find ourselves in this spiraling out of control violence.
And I'll go back to saying that the mayor has focused on that with Invest Southwest. So is there more that needs to be done? And should it be public or private investment?
Absolutely, there's more to be done. The fact that we still have an unemployment rate in the city of Chicago, and particularly for poor people, black and brown folks, that has reached the Great Depression era numbers, right? Until we solve that crisis, we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back, right? And so I think that the bottom line here is that this administration continues to fail the expectations that she established. And what's different in this moment is you actually have a progressive movement that has surrounded me.
Let me ask you about that progressive movement really quickly, because you have Congressman Chuy Garcia now hinting that he is going to get in the race. Are you the better progressive candidate?
Well, look, you know, Chuy 40 years ago helped lay the groundwork for an independent political movement that led to substantial change for that particular season. That movement has set the groundwork for my candidacy. And that's why I'm glad to have the support of pioneers from that generation, but also support from the people who are part of this movement today, like Congresswoman-elect Delia Ramirez, State Representative Lakeisha Collins, Alderperson Jeanette Taylor, Carlos Rosa, Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez-Sanchez, Daniel Laspada. They have the support of the Chicago Teachers Union. Independent political organizations around this city have surrounded their support around my candidacy, and I'm deeply humbled and excited about it.
Commissioner Brandon Johnson, now running for mayor, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now to Brandis for a dive into right-wing extremist groups and law enforcement. Brandis.
Paris, the Chicago Police Department is under fire over its decision to not fire an officer who lied about ties to the far-right Proud Boys. Police Superintendent David Brown says investigators, quote, were not able to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that this officer was a member of or was associated with the Proud Boys or any other hate group. So joining us now to talk about the Proud Boys and its recruitment of law enforcement members are Kevin Ruby, a senior research associate at the Chicago Project on Security and Threats with the University of Chicago, and Jared Holt, senior research manager at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. We did reach out to the Chicago Police Department for comment and have not received a response. Kevin and Jared, thanks to the two of you for joining us. Kevin, let's start with you. Please, what is your reaction that the Chicago Police Department isn't firing this officer?
I think it's surprising, given the amount of evidence that is available for links between the officer and the Proud Boys. I mean, we have to be clear that the Proud Boys are a violent far-right extremist group that is perhaps now best known for its role in the January 6th Capitol insurrection. And so those links are not to that group are not benign and should be taken very seriously.
Jared Holt, give us a little bit of background on the Proud Boys, please. How big is this group, and what was their role in the January 6th insurrection?
Yeah, the Proud Boys, cropped up around 2016, 2017 as the project of Gavin McInnes, who's kind of a shock jock, far-right radio personality, entertainer, former, co-founder of Vice. And since then, the Proud Boys have kind of evolved. There are chapters in nearly every state that operate on different levels of autonomy. A lot of them traffic in far-right ideology and consider themselves almost enforcers of a type, violent enforcers at things like Trump rallies or, other conservative rallies and campaigns, there to protect conservatives against a perceived threat, whether that is LGBT people or Antifa or whatever it may be. And that ultimately culminated in, their participation in the January 6th Capitol riot, which was not a small role. Leaders in the organization, it has been revealed over time, were in communication with other extremist groups coordinating and formulating what they were going to do that day, which unfortunately was really ugly.
Kevin Ruby, what is the appeal of Proud Boy membership or affiliation to members of law enforcement, and vice versa? Why do groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers recruit so heavily from military and law enforcement?
Well, that's a really, really good and interesting question. And I suspect that that there's a difference in what attracts law enforcement personnel to the Oath Keepers, which is an overtly sort of military-style group that explicitly recruits among military and law enforcement in order to sort of bolster its ranks and experience in the military domain, versus the Proud Boys, which, to my knowledge at least, doesn't specifically recruit among law enforcement and the military, but is attractive to men, especially, who are interested in representing a particular view of old school masculinity, I guess, and who are angry at what they perceive as the culture wars, as the progressive agenda, which really puts LGBTQ and other minorities like in the crosshairs.
Jared, how pervasive would you say is the issue of law enforcement getting involved with the Proud Boys or similar groups across the country?
I don't think extremism in the rank of law enforcement is an overwhelming issue, but even a few officers being involved in these kind of groups can cause real problems and degrade trust that communities have with law enforcement, which in recent years has already been rightfully fraught in many cases. We have seen law enforcement engaging with white supremacist groups in the past, engaging with the Proud Boys, militia groups like Oath Keepers, and if officers or other law enforcement personnel are not held accountable for those connections, and those connections are not appropriately considered a risk to the mission of police, of wanting, at least in theory, to have even and fair policing, that can also cause some issues too. It compromises the mission and outcomes of the police department.
Kevin, the FBI does not designate domestic groups as hate groups, which was part of the argument that the Chicago Police Department and the city made when deciding not to fire that officer. Why does not the FBI designate those groups as hate groups?
Well, I think in the United States, we have the First Amendment, and it protects free speech. And I think the federal government and the FBI are very wary of transgressing against the First Amendment. And so they've decided to focus on the behavior rather than the ideology. So it is the case that if you engage in a hate crime, right, you will be charged also, federally. But in terms of espousing or even being a member of a group that has a particular ideology, that's protected by the First Amendment, and that makes it very difficult for the government to address it, in this way.
So the Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown, he has walked a line on this, saying that the organization has zero tolerance for any members, whether sworn or civilian, being engaged with any hate groups like this. At the same time, he says that they completed a very thorough investigation and could not conclude up to the standard of proof that was necessary that this officer was a member of the organization. Jared, if CPD isn't taking any action here, what would it take for law enforcement to fire an officer suspected of engaging in these kinds of groups? In about 45 seconds.
I mean, that's probably a good question for law enforcement. Given what we do know, that this officer was, interrogated or met with the FBI about his connections to this group, that he was dishonest about his connections to those groups when he was investigated by the city, which, would seemingly be enough cause to reprimand an officer alone. It's confusing, right? And it seems like Chicago is trying to have it both ways, sort of tongue in cheek or coyly defending the Proud Boys on merits, but then also saying they didn't have enough evidence to take action against the officer.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. Kevin Ruby and Jared Holt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. We heard earlier from a new candidate for Chicago mayor, a contest that will be decided in a runoff if there's no clear winner in the initial election next February. And of course, the midterm general election is a week from today. Whichever candidate gets the most votes will be Illinois' next governor and U.S. senator. Pretty simple there. But nationally, a movement is spreading that would decide elections in a different way. Ranked choice voting. And it's on the ballot this cycle for some suburban voters. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the latest. Where is this on the ballot?
Yeah, Paris, so in Evanston, these suburban voters will not be just deciding who to vote for. They'll also be deciding how to vote in the future. Suburban Evanston, it's a northern suburb, by the way, seeking to become the first community in Illinois to use ranked choice voting for future municipal elections.
And how does it work?
So ranked choice voting really calls for just that. You rank your choices. So voters pick whoever they want to win. They also have the option to mark a second choice, third choice through however many candidates are on the ballot. And then if one of those candidates clears 50%, that candidate wins outright. But if not,
whoever gets the lowest number of first round votes, that candidate drops off, and their voters' votes get reassigned to the second to their second place choice. And we go through that until someone gets over 50% of the vote.
Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss believes it's a system that will reap benefits.
The outcome of all that is that the person who's eventually selected isn't just the person who had the most votes in the first round. Maybe they had 30% of the vote in a five-way race, but the other 70% of the community hates them. Instead, the person elected is somebody who a majority of the community feels most comfortable with.
When he was in the General Assembly, Biss actually sponsored legislation that would have implemented ranked choice voting in Illinois, but it did not gain traction. He is the mayor, but he's not speaking in an official capacity when it comes to ranked choice voting. There's an Evanston ethics ordinance here, so he and Council Mayor Devon Reed gave their personal and contrary point of view. Biss saying the change will help non-traditional and diverse candidates get elected and give those without deep pockets and deep connections a chance.
I feel like my whole life I'm hearing from people, some voters and some non-voters, who say, I don't know if I want to vote. I don't like these two options, but they're the only two with a chance. I like this other woman better, but she doesn't have a chance. Am I throwing away my vote if I vote for her? There are people who don't feel well represented in the current system, and ranked choice voting is for them. Ranked choice voting is for everybody who's ever felt like, do I have to vote strategically or can I vote my conscience?
Biss says ranked choice voting lets someone do both, vote their conscience and strategy. But Councilmember Reed says this will dilute the voice of voters of color, like those who make up the majority of his ward. Evanston currently chooses its council members, mayor, and city clerk in nonpartisan elections. They're held what's called off-cycle, as in on a different timeline than presidential and statewide races. Reed says that already makes Evanston's elections exclusive, with higher voter turnout from affluent voters, white voters, and seniors.
That our elections are already formulated in a way that tends to exclude minorities and people of color. I think layering on ranked choice voting will only disproportionately impact the Black and brown community here in Evanston and dissuade more folks from coming out, or dilute what their say is.
He says ranked choice voting may make more sense on a larger scale, say for congressional or presidential contests. But he says how Evanston does it now works. The top two candidates in multi-candidate primaries move on to consolidated races. He says that gives time for candidates and voters to get to know one another.
I can knock on every door in my community. When you're running for governor, you're running for president, you cannot get out and actually meet the voters and have conversations with them at their doors. And so, it's a very different level of engagement that you have here on the local level. And so that's why I think, it really benefits us to have, elections where it allows the time for folks to have two rounds, narrow it down.
Reed also says ranked choice voting puts a bigger mental load on voters, and that too could lead to disenfranchisement. Biss, though, says this method won't just change how voting happens. He says it could change the tenor of politics. To win in a ranked choice environment, a candidate is still motivated to win loyal backers, of course, but they also have to try to appeal to an opponent's support base as their second best option. Beth says that will make campaigns and politics less nasty.
I'm not going to attack the other candidates so much that somebody who likes them would never pick me as their second choice. And so I think not only will the campaigns be more positive and more constructive, but also that election system tends to pick elected officials who are better at working with others, especially working with others who don't always agree with them.
If the referendum in Evanston passes next week, ranked choice voting would first be used in Evanston in the spring of 2025. Now, there is no organized opposition, but some big national groups backing the ranked choice movement are pouring money into the effort. A ballot initiative committee, the Say Yes Ballot Initiative Committee, has $31,000 in the bank, and the bulk of that comes from groups called Fair Vote Action, Unite America, and Rank the Vote.
Amanda, thanks very much. And up next, musician Patti Smith talks about poetry, performance, and childhood memories of Chicago right after this.
How do we find resources we had no idea about?
The community seems to want us to be in this space.
There's plenty of potential to do that stuff and keep it within the neighborhood and keep it ours.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including a look at some struggles poll workers are facing this election season. But first, only one member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame also won a National Book Award. Patti Smith won for her memoir, Just Kids, recounting her life with artist Robert Mapplethorpe. Now she has a new prize from the Chicago-based Poetry Foundation. Patti Smith sat down with Chicago Tonight to talk poetry, performance, and her early years in Chicago.
And which permeated, my performances, propelled my entrance into rock and roll. Part of everything I do, I've never received an accolade for poetry, and this is such an important one, and came as a complete surprise. Where you been, my blue-eyed son? Of course it's important, whether it was Bob Dylan or Jimi Hendrix or, Jim Morrison or whoever, has incorporated poetry in my time and in our present. And then we have the whole canon of poetry, from the Psalms of David to, Arthur Rimbaud to Sylvia Plath. I think we're very fortunate to have it was a swan. But to me, swan seems such a little word for such a magnificent creature. I learned very early on that people had to work for a living, that you had to work not only for a living, but work toward anything that you want to do. Anything, any of your goals, you would have to work hard. And that was part of our upbringing. And so I've always worked. I've always had it, until I started touring, which is also a job. I had jobs in factories, I picked blueberries, I babysat, I worked in a bookstore. But when I was able to devote myself entirely to art, to creating, to performing, to writing, I kept that work ethic. I think that should be part of our daily practice. It makes life more, to me, more wondrous to be, having gratitude as part of your daily practice. There's so many things to be grateful for. I'm grateful for everything. I'm grateful for my toothbrush. you know, because it makes brushing my teeth easy. Sometimes I do a really good brush and I'll say thank you. Really, saying thank you only takes a second. I'm just, you know, learning every day, learning new things, trying to keep in step with new generations, which is pretty hard, and be of some use to them. When I was young, I was ready to change the world. Now I'm just, you know, my role is different. I'm ready to be here if people need an abstract friend. So here I am.
Awards, also known as the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, were awarded to 10 people this year. Along with Patti Smith, the winners include Sandra Cisneros and Nikki Giovanni. The complete list is on our website, where you'll also find 10 things you might not know about Patti Smith. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, what will this upcoming election look like for election judges and poll workers? After finalizing his takeover of Twitter, Elon Musk sparks controversy by retweeting a conspiracy theory about the attack on Paul Pelosi. And we head to the Pilsen neighborhood to show how a local woman is getting creative for a Mexican tradition. But first, some more of today's top stories. Michael Madigan was arraigned today in his federal racketeering case. However, the former Illinois House Speaker was allowed to skip the phone hearing. Madigan's lawyer entered a plea of not guilty to the superseding indictment, which adds conspiracy allegations involving AT&T Illinois. Madigan now faces 23 counts of racketeering and corruption. Starting in December, the COVID-19 protocols at the federal courthouse will be lifted, and many judges will begin requiring criminal defendants to appear in person rather than by phone. The former speaker is free on bond since being charged 8 months ago and has yet to appear before a judge. Voters beware. A new texting scam may try and trick you. The State Board of Elections warns that Illinois voters are receiving unsolicited text messages with incorrect information about Election Day polling places. The board says it does not communicate with voters via text message. The messages are from a group called Voting Futures. Voters who receive suspicious election-related text messages or emails with potential misinformation should forward screenshots or links to scamalert@elections.il.gov. And to find the correct polling place information, you can use the polling place locator tool on the State Board of Elections website. White Sox might have a new manager. Reports say Kansas City Royals bench coach Pedro Grifol will succeed Tony La Russa to head the Southsiders. The Miami native is 52 years old and has spent nearly 10 years with the Royals. The team could make an official announcement later this week. And now to Paris and that shortage of election workers. Paris.
Brandis, T-minus 1 week until Election Day 2022, and election authorities are scrambling to make sure there are enough election judges and poll workers ready to work. Conspiracies and attacks on election workers have had a chilling effect on recruitment, and just today, the State Board of Elections has warned of a text message disinformation campaign aiming to sow confusion about Election Day polling places. And joining us are Max Bever, Director of Public Information for the Chicago Board of Elections, Stevie Valles, Co-Director of Chicago Votes, and Isorelia Hernandez, Election Judge Supervisor for the Lake County Clerk's Office. Welcome all of you here to Chicago Tonight. Max Bever, I want to start with this news that came this afternoon from the State Board of Elections warning of a group called Voting Futures sending robo-texts confusing voters. What do we know about this?
So we've just received a few complaints ourselves, and that's been increasing over the last few days. Voters have been receiving a text message, sending them to a wrong polling place location, sending them out of the city, sending them to Calumet City. That's the first thing you should know as a Chicago voter. If someone's trying to send you outside of city limits, that's not the right polling place. So the first thing I want to say is if you are looking for the most up-to-date election information, always go to your election authority first. In the city of Chicago, that's Chicago Board of Elections, or you can go to the Illinois State Board of Elections, or whatever your local authority is, or their social media pages. They're going to be the first stop shop for accurate information.
Any clue who's behind this campaign?
I'm afraid not. We've reported our complaints over to the Illinois State Board, and we hope we can find who's at the bottom of this.
And this is a problem happening nationally, as I understand, so there will be several authorities, I'm sure, looking into this. Steve Valles, what kinds of misinformation campaigns are you seeing, and what's the best way to combat them?
Yeah, just in general, I see a lot of communication that's inaccurate coming from a number of different sources around when you can vote, who's eligible to vote, what you need to vote, where to go vote. And obviously, this can contribute to voter apathy and diminish the amount of people who are able to actually cast their ballot, which does nothing good for any of us. A lot of the work that we do is around presenting accurate information to specifically young voters, but the information we present is also helpful to voters of all ages. We put together a voter guide this year in order to help people know when to vote, where to vote, how to vote, as well as a list of all of the candidates who are on the ballot and the issues those candidates have direct influence over. So hopefully we've been able to successfully counter the misinformation with accurate information and will contribute to more voters being able to cast their ballots and not less.
And Israeli Hernandez, the other question this year is, will there be enough election workers, judges, poll workers to staff elections up in Lake County? Are you confident that you'll have enough up there on Election Day?
Well, we have enough judges for all of our polling places, but it's not where we would like it to be. It's not optimal. Typically around this time or for a November election, we're aiming to have about 1,100 judges right now. And that includes, judges to allow for a rotation and all the judges to take a break throughout the day. Right now, we were at about 900 judges. So again, it's not optimal, but we continue to recruit up until the day before Election Day. We reach out to all of our judges to see who might be available, but as it stands right now, it's doable, but again, it's not optimal.
Israeli, why do you think it's harder this year to get the full staffing?
There's several reasons. COVID continues to come up. So COVID continues to be a concern for our election judges, especially the population of judges that we have. They're very concerned, very afraid of COVID still. And then there's also some concern about being harassed at the polling places from voters. And again, going back to that misinformation, the judges are just there to facilitate the process. We can inform the voter as to procedures and answer any questions, but when it goes beyond the scope of what we've taught them, it's difficult. And then sometimes we have to explain to judges, we're not there to, for this to become a confrontation. If you need to seek out assistance, call the local authorities.
Some of this probably stemming from 2020 and false claims of stolen election from the former president and many in the Republican Party. What about in Chicago, Max Bever? Are you fully staffed, and have you seen judges worried about harassment and intimidation?
We are fully staffed, in fact, overstaffed at this moment. We're doing in much better shape than we were in the last primary election, and that's due to recent redistricting as well as precinct consolidation. Previously in Chicago, we needed over 10,000 election judges. Now we need 6,450. So we're good, almost 1,500 over that number, but we are preparing for resignations, those last-minute dropouts. We're also looking for...
Always seems to happen.
It does always seem to happen. Election judges are the most critical part of a functioning democracy, but unlike jury duty, it's not mandatory. So it is basically a volunteer system. Election judges are paid up to $230 in Chicago, but it's a long day, and it requires a lot of training to do so. And it is something where election judges can make that snap decision and say, maybe this isn't worth it for me today, especially if they're reading the news, especially if they're feeling insecure about being in a polling place. But this is why we wanted to overstaff our polling places ahead of the November 8th election in Chicago, make sure that we've got enough staff, we've got enough support, and that people feel safe.
Stevie Vias, speaking of feeling safe, there have been some reports nationally about intimidation happening at places like ballot drop box. Are you worried about voter intimidation here, and have you heard any specific threats?
I think voter intimidation is something we should always be diligent about trying to prevent, no matter where the election is happening and when the election is happening. Our city, the state, the country has a long history of voter intimidation, and we always need to remain diligent in ensuring that doesn't become something that's a part of our voting culture. I think that, making sure election judges are trained in such a way to support and ensuring that voter intimidation is not something that is persistent at the polling locations is really important. partnering with community groups like we do, um, like 866 Our Vote and the Election Protection Hotline, and the lawyers over at Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to ensure that voters know their rights and they aren't being told the wrong thing at polling locations and deterring them from casting their ballots. This is always something that we hear reports of every election cycle. But I think we can continue to be proactive in making our systems more free, fair, and safe by either passing policies, doing more intentional trainings, and ensuring that bad policies that could put people more at risk don't get passed in the future.
And indeed, the FBI and the Department of Justice have hotlines set up for Election Day as well. Isarelia Hernandez, both parties talk about having watchers at the polls. Who's allowed to watch, and what exactly are they allowed to do?
Poll watchers are allowed to observe the procedures that take place in a polling place before, during, and after. They are not allowed to handle materials. They can challenge a voter, but they are not part of the decision process. That's left up to the judges. They're not allowed to assist the voters within the 100 feet electioneering zone. So they're there more for observational purposes, but again, not to interfere with the voting process.
All right, so we wish you all a safe and successful election day. And then, Max, in Chicago, you got to turn around and get ready for the municipal elections just a couple months later.
We do. We've got 2 in after this. And if you allow me just one more, Paris, we are looking for bilingual election judges. So if you speak a different language than English, please sign up. Go to pollworker.chicagoelections.gov.
That has been an issue this year. Fewer precincts with a multi-language service for non-English speakers, so that is a problem. Thanks for bringing that up, and our thanks to Max Bever, Stevie Valles, and Isarelia Hernandez. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And with Election Day a week away, be sure to visit WTTW's online voter guide, where you'll find a rundown of local races and candidates in their own words on why they want your vote. It's all at WTTW.com/voter guide. And up next, a look at the controversy surrounding Elon Musk's Twitter purchase, so please stay with us.
It's been just days since the world's richest man, Elon Musk, officially took over Twitter. The self-declared free speech absolutist immediately declared on his Twitter page, quote, "The bird is freed." Since Musk's takeover, the use of the N-word on the platform has reportedly surged 500%. And Musk himself has faced backlash for retweeting and then deleting a conspiracy theory about the hammer attack on Paul Pelosi, the husband of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Joining us to discuss the implications of Musk's Twitter takeover are Jessica Gonzalez, an attorney, racial justice advocate, and co-CEO at media advocacy group Free Press, and Harold Krent, professor of law at Illinois Tech Chicago Kent College of Law, and previously the longtime dean at the law school. Thanks to you both for joining us. Jessica, let's start with you, please. Your organization, Free Press, it's a part of a broad coalition of consumer and civil rights groups that just last week published a report on the failure of social media companies, including Twitter, to fight disinformation ahead of the midterm elections. How concerned are you that our elections could again be undermined by the false reports that we see on social media?
Very concerned indeed. Listen, we released a report on Thursday, the day before Elon Musk acquired Twitter, showing that across the board, social media companies have failed to take the necessary steps to protect election integrity on their sites. So that's not just Twitter, that's Meta, that's the Instagram and Facebook products that they have, YouTube and TikTok. We found that not only are these companies not enforcing content moderation rules at scale, they're not doing so well enough in languages outside of English, and that they're making special exceptions for VIP actors on their sites.
So on Sunday, Elon Musk retweeted this false conspiracy theory that alleged that Paul Pelosi knew and was in some sort of a relationship with the man who beat him with a hammer at his home last week. Here's how San Francisco's police chief responded to that conspiracy theory yesterday.
There is absolutely no evidence that Mr. Pelosi knew this man. As a matter of fact, the evidence indicates the exact opposite. It really is sad that these theories are being floated out there, baseless, factless theories that are being floated out there, and they're damaging. They're damaging to the people involved. They're damaging to this investigation. And, people are running with this stuff, and whether they believe it or not, these theories can influence the way people think about everything that's happening here.
So, Jessica, back to you. How does your organization and coalition view Musk's takeover of Twitter? What are your chief concerns now that he's in charge?
Listen, we need a responsible, consistent person thinking deeply about how to improve content moderation systems. Like I said, even before Musk took over, the company was very, very much in bad shape in this regard. And now with Musk's takeover, we're seeing these examples of not just others spreading conspiracy theories, but him partaking on his own. I'm really concerned, frankly. This was an assassination attempt at the person who was third in line to the U.S. presidency. This is something to be taken seriously. It's not a joke. And we believe that both Elon Musk and those who are responsible for moderating content on Twitter have a responsibility to weed out conspiracy theories and to protect users and our democracy from hate speech and lies.
Harold Krent, the First Amendment doesn't apply to Twitter since they're a private company, but what legal recourse might someone like Paul Pelosi or anyone else who feels they've been defamed or harmed in some way by social media, what recourse do they have if they wanted to seek justice?
They have very, very little recourse under current laws. The Congress passed the Community Decency Act in 1996, which immunizes online platforms such as Twitter or Facebook from any kind of defamation or other kinds of actions that they would be faced as a publisher. Obviously, Mr. Pelosi can go against the attacker, can go against anybody who conspired with the attacker, but in terms of legal remedies, they are scant. There's been some proposals to amend this immunity, but they haven't gone very far. And the difficulty, I agree with what Jessica said, the difficulty is to put an onus on these companies to figure out what's truthful about COVID, what's untruthful, what's truthful about the disinformation campaign and what's not. This puts a heavy burden on the platform companies. They could obviously do better, and we want to make sure that there's some kind of content moderation continues in Twitter, despite what Musk has said off and on, but it's not an easy road to travel on.
So, Harold, there's a section of the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, that states, quote, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Now, that clause has been effective at providing legal protection for social media companies from being sued for content published on their sites. Does this law need to be revisited?
There have been proposals, and indeed President Biden has suggested getting rid of 230 from time to time, but it hasn't gained traction because it would really stymie, I think, the online platforms if they didn't know what to do in terms of something that was a quickly emerging story. What's truthful, what's not truthful in terms of people remarking upon the news, remarking upon movies. We have Kyrie Irving's story just a couple of days ago. Very difficult to ascertain. But I do think that we ought to perhaps mirror this idea of a takedown situation where we have in the copyright situation, we have a separate congressional law that said if someone informs an online platform that there's a copyright violation, they have a duty to take it down, to investigate and take it down. And maybe, and Europe is trending in this direction, maybe we should too. If someone says this is disinformation, it's untrue, it's harassment, there should be a duty upon Twitter or Meta to investigate and take down offending material.
And Jessica, we just heard from Harold about Kyrie Irving. We've got about 45 seconds left. LeBron James has already highlighted this apparent surge in the use of the N-word on Twitter since Musk's takeover. One way that you all are trying to hold Twitter accountable is through its advertisers. Tell us in about 30 seconds, if you can, about the campaign that was launched today to get advertisers involved.
Happy to. We're working with Media Matters, Accountable Tech, Free Press, and 4 dozen organizations, including prominent civil rights organizations like Color of Change and NAACP. And what we're asking is really simple. Twitter advertisers, We need you to ask Elon Musk to make some firm commitments around content moderation. This isn't just for the sake of humanity. It's also to protect brand safety. We do not want to see hate speech and conspiracy theories running rampant. The advertisers have a role to play here, and our coalition is calling on them to not
advertise unless
Twitter, but just to say we will not be advertising here if you don't get the situation under control.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Jessica Gonzalez and Harold Krent for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Up next, honoring departed loved ones in a Day of the Dead altar. Stay with us.
Today marks the start of El Día de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, a traditional Mexican holiday honoring loved ones who have died. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez went to Pilsen to visit a Chicago resident who's transformed her backyard into an altar.
When you walk into this backyard, you're transported into an experience. You'll find skulls, flowers, and all kinds of objects offered to those who once lived.
There's a phrase that says, people die when they are forgotten. So they will always going to live in our hearts.
For the last 3 years, Isabel Hernandez has spent weeks building elaborate Day of the Dead altars.
Even if I spend whatever amount of money, this is my way to give it back to the community, to share something that I love to do and I can do for themselves, not just me. I'm happy with it.
El Día de los Muertos translates to the Day of the Dead. It's a Mexican tradition. For 2 nights, it's believed the border between the real world and spirit world merge. During those nights, the souls return to celebrate and feast with their loved ones.
A lot of people think this is something evil because we are remembered the dead. No, this is celebrating the lives of the people who are not anymore with us. When we make our altar with all the family members that died, it's also to teach the other generations they never met the family members, an uncle or grandparents, whatever, that this is our history. And sometimes we find out that there's something common with some of our relatives that, oh, my uncle Tomas liked the same things that I did because it's in our genes.
This year, Hernandez's theme is a cycle of life, a tribute to more than 400 people and pets who once called Pilsen home.
I decided that in one area I was going to put the very young people, even babies that they just live one day, then the middle-aged people and the seniors, and finally the coffin, which is the end of life.
The Pilsen resident says she has never considered herself an artist, yet mostly everything you see is handmade.
When you finish and you look at what you created, I mean, ¿cómo te sientes? Like, how do you feel?
I amaze myself. I'm looking at it. When I finished the first butterfly, I made him in the basement, and I look at it, and I'm like, did I do that? Because I never had drawn a butterfly, something big, and it had to be separated. And I amazed myself, I didn't know that I was so good.
Despite dealing with carpal tunnel syndrome, she says her passion to design helps with the pain.
Some years I said, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. But when people thank me for doing this and that they are happy, I said to myself, I have to keep doing it.
It's worth it for you.
Yeah, and I owe it to the community, to the people who enjoy it every single year.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And if you'd like to visit Act Fast, Isabel Hernandez plans to take down the altar tomorrow to start preparing for Christmas decorations. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
That is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing, and you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.